related to what happened at the Ellipse before the actual riot on January 6th. Now, Trump says he's going to invoke executive privilege so that the House can't get these documents. But the current White House counsel, Dana Remus, basically says, it's not up to you. She writes this, quote, the constitutional protections of executive privilege should not be used to shield from Congress or the public information that reflects a clear and apparent effort to subvert the Constitution itself. So explain here for folks at home. We only have one president at a time, last time I checked. So what exactly does the president, the former president, I should say, think he's up to here? Who does this privilege belong to?
Well, the privilege belongs to the United States, and it is the current president's voice that matters most. The former president has a right to his opinion and can inform the current president of that opinion, but in the end, it should be, and we saw this litigated in Nixon, where he tried to defy Congress's effort and the archives' effort to make documents available that he didn't want, and he lost in court. I think that's what will happen here. Great deference is given to the current president. The former president has a right to an opinion, but that's all he has a right to.
Well, it's not even clear that he was acting in his capacity as president at the time of the January 6th insurrection. I think there's an argument to be made there should be an exception there for evidence of a crime. You also have the former president's chief strategist, Steve Bannon. He's now defying the subpoena from House investigators. This is separate from the National Archives issue. It's all in one, but it's separate. But he wasn't even a White House employee on January 6th. That man had been fired years ago. And so now he thinks that this should be covered by executive privilege. How is that possibly going to work?
Well, he should lose, because executive privilege is a privilege that allows the executive, the president at the time, to receive candid advice from his senior advisors. That's what the privilege is intended to protect. Bannon didn't work in the White House since 2017. Therefore, on its face, the privilege is inapplicable to him. I think this is just typical Bannon stalling. His case should be resolved pretty quickly, and he should lose.
So if you're on the House committee, Michael, what do you do here? Because you don't want this to drag out. You want to be able to issue a report quickly, but you also want to be able to enforce your subpoenas. You want to send a signal to the world that these subpoenas actually have some teeth and actually matter. So if you were on the House committee, would you refer this to the Justice Department?
If a person refused to comply with the subpoena, assuming he was served,
right?
Because Scavino hasn't been served, and that's another whole matter.
Well, Politico, just so we know, Michael, Politico is reporting that Scavino has been served, but Bannon, we know, is not cooperating.
Correct. So the answer to the question is, if you have been served and you refuse to show up, then Congress should enforce its powers of contempt, civil and criminal, to force the person in. We saw this in the Don McGahn case during the Mueller investigation, where he refused to come in, and the court resolved that he has to come in and testify, and he ultimately did. The problem is speed, and if the courts are dilatory, if they don't move quickly, then this will drag on for a long time. Again, it took 2 years to get done. But I think Congress has an obligation to inform the American people what happened here, and they should use all of their contempt powers, civil and criminal, to get these people in there.
Well, and also the complicating factor here, of course, is if you refer it to the Justice Department, what does the current Attorney General want to do with that? You know, Merrick Garland's going to be the one in the decision-making seat on that one. So we will see where this goes, and hopefully we will get your analysis again as the twists and turns continue. Michael Zeldin, thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Some good news to share with you this morning on the COVID front. The United States starting to trend in the right direction as COVID-19 hospitalizations, cases, and deaths continue to decline nationwide. New coronavirus infections have fallen below 100,000 cases a day for the first time in 2 months. But U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy is still stressing the importance of vaccinations. Listen.
Certainly cautiously optimistic, and I think whether or not we see another surge of the virus depends in part on what we do to really accelerate vaccination rates.
Hospitals in states like Alaska and Pennsylvania are still seeing a surge in patients sick with COVID-19 as community transmission remains high in certain areas. CNN's Polo Sandoval breaks down the details.
COVID-19 hospitalization rate is at its lowest point in nearly 2 months. Add to that the average number of new COVID cases each day, which fell below 100,000 this week for the first time since August. It's clear to many health experts that most of the nation is on the right path, with over 65% of eligible Americans to receive COVID-19 shots being fully vaccinated.
There are some communities that are really well vaccinated and really well protected, and then there are pockets of places that have very little protection. And the virus isn't stupid. It's going to go there.
That's what concerns both the current White House and the last. Admiral Brett Giroir served as COVID testing czar under the Trump administration. He agrees that the nation is at a promising point, but the war against COVID is far from over.
This was associated with an increase in vaccination rate, more testing, and about doubling of the mask wearing. So the American people did the right things, but we are not out of the woods yet. As the Surgeon General says, there are still a lot of Americans who do not have natural immunity and who have not been vaccinated. They are still susceptible.
While most of the lower 48 seems to be turning a corner, Alaska remains on high COVID alert. This week, state health officials reported a COVID case count 5 times greater than the national average. According to the health department, 20 of the state's medical facilities implemented crisis standards of care. That's a last resort when medical personnel have to ration care. Pfizer's race to secure emergency use authorization for its vaccine continues for children 5 to 11, as will its trials, according to the company. Vaccine advisors at the CDC will meet in the next couple of weeks to discuss Moderna and J&J boosters, and early November to discuss pediatric COVID vaccination. That reduces the likelihood that U.S. children 11 and under will begin receiving shots before Halloween. Polo Sandoval, CNN, New York.
Polo, thank you. And some truly devastating new data for you this morning. Roughly 1 in 500 American children has lost a mother, a father, or a grandparent who cares for them since the start of the pandemic. 1 in 500. That is more than 140,000 kids nationwide, according to this CDC research. And it's even worse for minorities. Take a look at this. The data shows children of racial and ethnic minorities accounted for 65% of those who lost a primary caregiver. And that's even though minorities make up just 39% of the total U.S. population, while white children only accounted for 35% of that. And Boris, you know, it strikes me so much that this is happening at the same time that kids are expected to go back to class, act as if everything is normal. Everyone's talking about how great it is that we have moved on from this virus, and it is great that we are making progress. But these children are still dealing with the loss of a caregiver.
Yeah, it's problematic for a number of reasons. If you think about the short term, the way that childcare impacts the economy, we're seeing that in the jobs report. But the long-term implications are painful to think about, because kids that have difficulty securing care have an increased risk of health issues, mental health issues, a risk of sexual assault. And that's an entire generation of kids that are now going to have to deal with the ramifications of this pandemic, and the way that that's going to affect our society moving forward. It's not something that you can digest easily.
I think that's right. I think the trauma here is going to be one of the lingering effects of this pandemic, for sure. Well, still ahead for you, a federal appeals court reinstating the 6-week abortion ban in Texas. Why that fight could end up in front of the Supreme Court again.
Plus, the U.S. hitting an economic roadblock. Now President Biden trying to put a positive spin on a second disappointing jobs report in a row. We'll be right back.